Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on this track. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speakers in this track. So we have from Economic Consulting Associates, John Paparistimou. And I'm sorry to the Greeks if I completely butchered that, but I tried my best. And we have Bobby Smith from the Energy Storage Island. So John supports the energy transition within ECA, and he works in markets and commercial advisory, investment planning, regulation, climate strategy. And he has over 13 years of experience in electricity markets, networks. He's advised private investors, utilities, governments, regulators. And prior to ECA, John worked at National Grid in market modeling and network development. Since 2019, Bobby has been working with the Energy Storage Island members and policymakers to advance the deployment of energy storage in Ireland. And he previously served as grid manager at Wind Energy Ireland and as an analyst at the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, where he focused on network policy, security of supply, and the development of DS3 ancillary services. So today, together, they'll explore the topic of unlocking the full potential of energy storage in Ireland through alternative network changes. You'll hear how network changes affect storage, how Plexus energy modelling informs decision-making, and how storage plays a critical role in meeting Ireland's renewable energy goals. So if you could all help me to give John and Bobby a warm welcome. Thank you very much.
Oops, stripped over. Cool, I might just start a bit if it's not here. Just apologies in advance, my voice kind of went over the weekend, so I've got the water with me in case it starts to go, but no questions for me anyway. I'll give them off to John at the end. So this study, which is quite a mouthful, we call the report something more, I think, accessible. Energy Storage Ireland is an association for energy storage in Ireland, Northern Ireland. We represent about 70 member companies that are developing, operating and owning energy storage on the island. And network charges, network tariffs, use of system tariffs are called different things, but they're basically the same. What users pay for accessing the transmission grid and paying for the use of that grid is what we're talking about here today. Those charges are really a big barrier to not only operation but investment in energy storage in the SEM, the market of Ireland and Northern Ireland. So around the second half of last year, we commissioned ECA to carry out a piece of work for us to look at, well, could we propose an alternative network charging framework for Ireland? And could we almost come up with the evidence base as to why those charges would be a positive thing for the end consumer and for the electricity grid in Ireland? So that's what we did, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. Yeah, John, just want to talk about ECA.
Is this working? Yeah. And a small introduction about ECA. We are a specialized economic consulting services company based in London and Athens. We've had the privilege of working with ESI, but beyond that, we focus on 4 service areas. That's investment planning, markets and commercial, economic regulation, and climate strategy. And we do that across 4 sectors, which is electricity, natural gas and hydrogen, waste and wastewater, and also energy access. I'll hand over back to Bobby to guide us through the first part of the slides.
Yep, super. So there's kind of 4 areas we're going to talk about here today: the approach to the study, an assessment of network charges, modelling the benefits, and financial viability. So I'll kick off, then I'll hand over to John to kind of get into the details of the modelling approach itself and the results. So on the approach to the study, there's kind of 4 kind of key areas that we looked at. Obviously, we wanted to deliver an alternative charging framework for Ireland. This starts off kind of on a principles basis. So we're looking at not only how do charges currently apply in Ireland and Northern Ireland, but also looking at the principles as to why charges are levied, and looking at some international comparisons as well compared against the market in Ireland. Then we modelled those changes to look at the system-wide benefits of the alternative reforms that we were proposing, how that benefits not only the grid but also the market in terms of system costs, CO2, reduced renewable curtailment, etc. And then in number 3 there, we looked at more of a localized sample of this, picking out an area of the grid which is particularly congested in the market, and modelling what increased utilization of storage would do for that area of the grid. And then the 4th one, last but not least, we looked at the financial sort of business case for storage, base case, what the current charges are doing for operation and investment in energy storage, and what the proposed alternatives would make the difference to the business case there. So those are the 4 key areas we touched on. First off, we kicked off an assessment of the network charges. The CRU is the energy regulator in Ireland. They have a number of principles on how they levy network charges. We looked at all of them, but the 4 ones that are highlighted in green are the ones we kind of decided to focus on. They're the most common across countries around Europe and the world. Cost reflectivity, so tariffs should aim to reflect as far as practical the cost that users impose on the network. Cost recovery, the tariffs ultimately should be to allow the system operators to do their job, to maintain, build and operate the network that we all use. And then simplicity, tariffs should be, as far as possible, easy to understand and implement for users of the grid. And then stability, tariffs should be relatively predictable and stable over a relatively long period of time, so users can respond to investment signals that tariffs are sending, and not see too much fluctuation in those in terms of year-to-year changes. Cost reflectivity that I talked about there, it's not really reflected that much in terms of cost recovery. There isn't too much of a link between them, at least what we've seen internationally. The cost reflectivity principle, in theory, regulators set that out, but ultimately at the end of the day, they're trying to recover costs for the network users, and those two also often don't sort of align that well. You can think of, there's kind of 2 broad elements of network charges and what they're intending to recover. One is essentially the cost of network expansion, or long-run marginal cost, LRMC. This is traditionally based on increasing demand. If demand is increasing in an area, you need to build up the grid to accommodate that demand. Therefore, that's driving a cost. Increasingly, we're seeing, though, in a renewables-dominated kind of system that's being driven by renewables. So renewable generation in a particular area is driving the need for transmission reinforcements in that area, which is causing a network cost. That, there's an ability to levy those costs and recover them. However, most costs in the network are actual historical residual costs, remembering that transmission assets are 40, 50-year assets in terms of their lifetime. You've got to recover a lot of costs that are already kind of baked into the system. And these are where we estimate there's probably 75, 80% of the total network cost is geared towards recovering at the outset. This is just a kind of a diagram of the breakdown of charges in the SEM, the Northern Ireland and Irish market. So you can see there's 100% of the required revenues on the left there. It's broken down in terms of network costs, as in physical infrastructure, and then system services, which is more operational costs for managing the network, which includes things like your ancillary services, your Blackstar capability, etc. And then in Ireland anyway, that's broken down roughly in terms of 85% of those costs being levied on demand and 15% being levied on generation. And the tricky thing is that Northern Ireland and Ireland, even though they share a single electricity market, are actually misaligned in terms of their tariff approach, where storage in Northern Ireland only pays generator tariffs, not demand, whereas in Ireland, storage pays demand charges and not generator tariffs. So the complete inverse of each other, which creates kind of a distortion in the market and an uneven playing field. And then the issue as well is that demand charges, because you're exposed to so much more of the cost there, you can see, they're generally much higher. So storage in the Republic of Ireland is basically paying very, very high demand charges. These are based on a fixed megawatt import capacity, and then a volumetric charge per energy usage as well, with very little difference in terms of time of use. There's a slight peak-off-peak difference, but generally there's not really any sort of time of use or locational signal being sent through these demand charges, and they are quite high. So just to give you an example, the system services volumetric charge in Ireland can be up to €30 megawatt hour in a period. So that's essentially adding on to the energy that the storage is buying in the market. So you can see how that's a fundamental issue for storage in Ireland today. And then, so we looked at these principles of how storage is charged, both in Ireland and internationally. In general, residual costs on the network, costs that users can't respond to, are levied on final demand. We've taken just one example, particularly in GB, where that's the approach. Having a more harmonized approach to network tariffs, particularly across trading of interconnectors, means it's a level playing field, not only for in Ireland in terms of accessing the more international markets. So we believe those charges should be levied only on final demand. Generation and storage could be exposed to the more locational grid network expansion costs for the grid. And that is something that ECA have recommended, in terms of you could take a locational element of generator tariffs and then charge that to storage based on if it is driving an additional need for reinforcement of the network. I think you can find in most cases storage is not. It charges and discharges, actually assisting the profile of the network rather than not. And then there's an element of DCHU, demand use of system charges, which could be levied on the system peak as well. And we've seen some countries do that in terms of the triad approach in GB. The French have an approach where they're forecasting advanced periods where there will be peak congestion on the grid and trying to get users to shift demand away from those periods by basically putting high demand charges on those times. And then in future, a dynamic locational generator tariff could be introduced, where it is essentially you could almost be paying generators via network charges to locate in certain areas of the network if they are benefiting that grid. Again, think of storage. If it's charging at a particular time when the grid is congested, it's absorbing renewables and then releasing that energy at a later time when the grid is better able to accommodate it. That's reducing the need for network expansion. It's aiding the operation of the grid. Potentially there could be a charge that actually swings towards a negative and reflects that value. So essentially we boiled all this together and came up with if the charges are being truly cost reflective, if we were looking at modeling this, essentially the network charges for storage would be zero, or very minimal if it's covering any kind of operation maintenance charges on the grid. And that's what we used as the basis for the Plexus model, which John is going to run through now.
Thank you, Bobby. So taking that last point from Bobby, this is all about creating the base case plus the alternative charges and then start comparing them against each other. And I'll first set the scene by talking you through what our main modeling of the SEM looked like, so the all-island market. So first we updated the model to the latest projections of the SEM market. We focused on 2030 in this case, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the next slide. This is a separate node for Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, so nothing else in between that is being modeled other than a specific case that I'll touch on in a bit. So that forms the base case of our analysis. At the same time, we prepare the alternative network charges as Bobby's just talked you through. So the same model gets built up with the alternative network charges that we're proposing, and then it's a simple comparing those two against each other to see what the potential benefits are from these alternative network charges on the energy storage on the system. We did take this a bit further, so there was an add-on to our modeling to look a bit more into the constraint analysis. So as you can imagine, just having the two nodes is quite a high-level approach. We're ignoring most of the network in that case. So what we did to capture, excuse me, the regional constraint impacts was look at the case of County Donegal. So this is a northwest area radial region that has experienced some of the highest dispatch down levels actually recently, and it's got quite a high amount of wind attached to it. And there's some lines that cross a certain border, and it's much easier to evaluate the impact that the alternative network charges would have in that case. We did that for two subcategories, if you like, so a mixture of 2 and 8 hour storage in that region, and a mixture of 2, 8, and 100 hour storage. Just look at a long duration storage and see the impacts of that as well, and compare the results as well. The constraint analysis was then scaled up indicatively to a national level to come up with a figure of what the benefits might be from that at a national level. Just touching a bit more on the model setup. So dispatch model in Plexus, modeling year 2030, as I already said. The model covers in detail all the unit level modeling of SEM. ECA has a GB model as well that was attached to it, and was quite a bit of work to make sure that they're aligned as well, and there's no modeling errors, if you like, appearing and creating things. And then there was a simplified representation of the EU model, and those are important because the interconnectors in 2030 have quite a big impact. As I've already mentioned, SEM was split into Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as two nodes, plus the congestion study of Donegal. We used the regulating authorities model. They publish it, which is great. And we updated it based on the latest generation capacity statement, and we also used the SOEPs, Shaping Our Future, Electricity Future, published by EirGrid. There has been a new model released by the regulating authorities since we did this study last year, but this was for the one previously, the one that was back-tested and published for 2021-29. Commodity assumptions are based on the latest future energy scenarios, but adjusted. There's a commodity setup file that the regulating authorities publish to capture some of the details and particularities on commodities in the Irish market. All I want to touch on here on the GB market is that it's based on our assumptions and interpretation of the future energy scenarios and aligning it appropriately with what we've assumed in Ireland. The key thing here in the interconnections, we've assumed that Maris or Lurk is not included by 2030, but the others, Celtic and Greenlink, are in this model. So that sort of sets the scene. I won't go into the detail of the numbers, but this is our model. Maybe highlighting a few things. There's quite a bit of wind on the system by 2030, as you can see. If you look at the storage at the bottom, you'll see the different cases for Donegal, where we've assumed the longer duration storage as well. The other thing to note is we've taken the median demand projections by EirGrid for demand, both total energy and peak energy in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now, just a quick presentation of the base scenario and the alternative charging arrangements, just from a charging perspective. I just want to recap on what the base case means. As Bobby's already said, there's a mismatch between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, not just for energy storage, but also generators, and we've reflected that in our study. So for generators, there's a fixed charge, and for batteries, there's a fixed charge and variable charge in the Republic of Ireland, and a fixed-only charge in the Northern Ireland node. In the alternative charging arrangements, we've removed charges of TUOS, transmission use of system charges, entirely. Maybe not 100% correct, but good enough for this modeling purposes. You know, you can argue there's locational elements that would change that. And for generators, the postage stamp portion of the TUOS charges has been reduced. The remainder is purely down on location, and you can see that in the statements that both EirGrid and Sony publish around that. So that was all updated, and just to give you a quick visual representation of what that looks like across both of our nodes in our model, you know, that's just all the generators and the network charges that they would see before and after. So scenario one is the alternative charges in this case. And you can just see they're reduced massively, basically. Now moving on to the results of the modeling exercise. At the top, you can see the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland graphs. It's a split of each of the storages based on duration. And you'll see that not much changes in Northern Ireland as much as in Republic of Ireland. That's purely a reflection of once you bring in the alternative charges, you've got a level playing field. But what this does highlight is the current mismatch that exists in the market. So you'll see that in Republic of Ireland, the average cycles per day increases quite significantly. In Northern Ireland, it actually moves slightly the other direction because of that mismatch. Once you look at things at the SEM level, it's quite interesting. You know, overall battery utilization increases by 30%. That's one of the main takeaways from this with the alternative charges versus the base case. The reason there's differences between 4 hour, 6 hour, and 8 hour is just, firstly, what the share of those are in each region. So I've not put the ROI and NI versions on here, but if you remember from the previous slide, which showed the installed capacity, the fact that 6 hours go up more than 4 hours, for example, is just purely down to there's no 6 hour batteries assumed in Northern Ireland in that region, according to current forecasts. So, you know, the impact of the alternative network charges is just much, much larger. And some of the biggest wingers are the longer duration storages, as you can see on the far right. It just sees a relatively bigger increase to the rest. So total generation from energy storage in SEM increases 30% from 2,300 gigawatt hours to 3,000, and the increase in generation ranges from 18% to 80% based on what I just discussed. Bringing it all together now, and this is a summary at a very high level, the reduction in the system operating cost is due to the increased usage of other means of generation other than peaking plants. So you're substituting that with other generation because the storage is better utilized. And there's also the reduced volumetric component of the network charges. The reduction in costs for oversupply under the unrealized available energy compensation. This is a compensation that's given to renewable energy that is instructed not to operate, although it could. That's also reduced in the alternative charges. And there's also a reduction in costs associated with balancing mechanism assets, so following constraining of renewables that would occur before. So you're better utilizing your renewables. So, and the fourth element is the reduction in emissions. So that's an obvious one, and for that we've used that number that you see at the bottom to calculate the social cost of carbon taken, basically at that level, which is has gone up in recent years according to that source. Bringing that all together. First, I should mention that the pass-through to consumer benefits, with the exception of the reduced volumetric network charges, is what makes up what makes up the net operating benefits. So we do not factor in the reallocation of network charges because they've just moved from volumetric to being charged directly to the consumers. So if you add all of that up, and the graph on the right shows you that comes to 37 million in total for that 1 year of modeling. There are some additional benefits that could be argued. So in Plexus, we've actually seen an export potential with corresponding GVA benefit of around 16 million, but we've not factored that in now because that's got quite a few assumptions behind it as well that could need to be investigated. Moving on to the financial viability of it all. This is the last slide. It's just trying to bring back together what this all means. So for this analysis, we have assumed the commissioning year being 2030, assumes a 15-year lifespan, targets 9% return of equity, 70% gearing. There's also some learning effects that are assumed, so the costs drop going forward. And there's some assumptions based on the most recent capacity auction results. No DS3 revenues are included in this analysis, and there's a high-level estimate of the balancing mechanism premium that batteries could get. Overall, if you look at the two graphs here, you'll see how these stack up for each type of battery, but overall, you'll see that the annual revenues and the estimated MPV improve with the alternative charges. The losses reduce between 30 and 70%, depending on which one you're looking at, especially for the longer duration batteries. But nevertheless, there is still a gap that remains in all cases to achieve an IRR hurdle rate, and some of the things that have been discussed this morning on markets and how to influence and incentivize that further going forward. So yeah, that's it, and hopefully a high-level summary of our project. There is a report on the website of Energy Storage Ireland that you can download, and it gives way more detail than what we've presented. This has been a very high-level presentation of it all, and you've got our contact details there as well in case needed. Thank you very much.
So I think we've got a few minutes just to take some questions. If you could raise your hand if you had any questions.
No.
So John, Bobby, I'll maybe kickstart here, and I'll give you all an opportunity to think of some. But I was just interested as to whether there were any comparable studies in any other countries that you're aware of.
I can take that. Yeah, not that we're aware of, no. And I think this is quite unique in that sense, where I think a lot of the network charges that we see in countries around Europe and globally don't reflect the value that storage provides to the grid because they were designed prior to there being a lot of energy storage on the grid generally. So they're either a fixed form of generation or a fixed form of demand. That's how they treat you, whereas storage just sort of sits in the middle, so it's a bit of an awkward one. A lot of the network charging arrangements that we see in countries are either not appropriate, or if they are more geared towards energy storage, they're generally to principles or exemptions. There's very little actually financial modelling or detail behind, well, what exactly should those charges be if they were to be such and such, what benefits would that have for the grid that John has demonstrated. So as far as we can see, it's actually, there aren't that many comparable studies out there that have looked at in this level of detail anyway.
Great, thank you. Question over there.
Thanks very much, folks. Very good study. Thank you. John, just in terms of the Plexus setup, what look ahead were you using in the ST schedule for the 100-hour batteries, and was it the same across all scenarios?
That's a good question. We did play around with that. I actually don't remember at the top of my head because we tried quite a few sensitivities before we landed on. We did this at the back end of last summer, so I'll look it up. I can give you an answer before the end of today for that. But we did look at it. We played around with different numbers, and it does have a significant impact from a modeling perspective, and it is important, especially for the longer duration side of things that we looked at, yeah.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? No, great. Well, John, Bobby, thank you so much for that. I think that was a really informative presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.